in the last lap of a whirlwind election campaign, Barbadians will on Wednesday deliver their verdict on whether they will stay the course with the Barbados Labour Party, opt for One Barbados with the Democratic Labour Party, or choose a new future with the Alliance Party for Progress. So much is at stake for the country battling its third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, rebuilding a battered economy, and charting a new course as a republic. Three parties, three stark different visions for Barbados' future. It's anyone's guess who will emerge the victor. Good evening, I'm Kareem Smith. This is BT's Pulse, the election edition, and with us today is an expert panel who will zero in on campaign 2022. With us this evening is political analyst Devaron Bruce, University of the West Indies political scientist Dr. Kristina Hinds, and veteran pollster Peter Wickham. Now, we normally tend to describe elections as the mother of all battles, where we tend to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. What have the last 3 weeks shown us about the major political parties and the effectiveness of their campaigns? Is this the case in 2022? How would you characterize the election thus far? Devaron?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and a good afternoon or good night to your audience. And to your question, how would I characterize the election thus far? I would say that there've not been any major surprises, yet somehow it's an election that we've never seen before. And that is obviously within the context of the COVID pandemic and the early stage of the election being called as well, and the issues that emerged out of that early calling. So we are seeing, for instance, the onset of COVID-19 patients not being able to vote. We're seeing issues with the Electoral and Boundaries Commission seemingly being overwhelmed when it comes to the transfer of addresses, and just the election in itself just feels different. Naturally, we don't have those very mass meetings as we would have seen before, and the picnics and the excursions and those various things. So it's definitely a different type of election, but somehow there's not been any major surprises or scandals or anything emerging out of it. So far, I would say it's been, again, surprising, not very surprising, but still very different from what we've had before.
Okay. Mr. Wickham,
Mm-hmm.
early on when the election had just been called, there were a number of questions about, on one hand, the Democratic Labour Party's readiness to contest, and then there were also some questions at the very beginning about the Barbados Labour Party and whether some within the B's camp would have also been caught by surprise. What have the last few weeks shown us?
Yeah, I mean, as Deborah was saying, it's a very different election. We've never had an election called this early before. 1994 would have been the proximate year, which would have been when the Sandiford administration collapsed. There was a vote of no confidence, and we were rushed to the polls several months early. The timeline is similar, but the circumstances were different. When that election was called, it was clear that neither the BLP nor the BLP was ready. Sandiford called the election and gave 90 days, which was a huge, long election campaign, probably the longest in our history, before we went to the polls in 94. During that period, the parties had an opportunity to get ready. This occasion, there was no such opportunity. There was no such luxury. I have to admit that I'm thoroughly convinced that the Barbados Labour Party was ready for this election. I have reason to believe that they were ready for it since November last year. So the BLP essentially was able to hit the ground with manifestos, posters, and whatnot, notwithstanding the propaganda to the contrary. However, the Democratic Labour Party was caught flat-footed, which is entirely unsurprising. Having said that, however, one has to admire the tenacity of the BLP to be able to complete its team, to be able to put together a manifesto, which was making quite decent reading from my own glossary reflection on it. And to be able to put together a platform and raise necessary funds and so on to run an election campaign, that was not bad. I mean, there's some issues which we will get into shortly, which I have some concerns about. But by and large, I think that where the BLP has come from 2 weeks ago to where they are now is remarkable. And, one has to give them some level of kudos for coming up to the getting to the finish line in this shape.
Okay. And what about you, Dr. Hinds? The two other panelists would have outlined a number of anomalies as it relates to this election. With just a few days left to go, where do our major parties stand as far as you're concerned?
I will stay by my view that the Barbados Labour Party has an edge, and it has had an edge, the incumbent advantage, because it called the election, it called it early, and it has been able to have a head start basically at every turn. So, as Mr. Wickham said, in putting out the manifestos and having the posters out, in all of their garb and outfits, they have been a bit ahead. But I will say that I believe the Democratic Labour Party was relatively prepared, especially considering the extent to which it was defeated in 2018 and the level of rebuilding that was required. I think it has done quite a decent job, despite some, maybe stalling in the beginning and some unclarity when it came to its message. I believe it is doing fairly well. And I think the Democratic Labour Party is showing that it can gain some ground, which it certainly will need to do if it wants to survive as a political party. As for the other parties, the smaller parties, I think the APP is an interesting development. And I will be interested to see if this party can outlive this election and ground itself across Barbados, or will remain a convenient partnership.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hinds. Those were just some opening remarks. We'll take a break now, and when we return, we will be discussing a hot topic of late, the so-called tell-all from a BLP loyalist turned DLP strategist, as well as a comment from a former minister under the DLP administration about the question of leadership in the party. We'll also take a look at what we have characterized as some of our seats to watch. Stay with us.
Never too early, never too late to recharge and hydrate. Get your daily dose the right way. Grab an oasis, now why wait? Never too early, never too late to recharge and hydrate. Get your daily dose the right way. Grab an oasis, now why wait? The greatest, the safest oasis for sure. Oasis, it's purer than pure.
Caribbean Cool is a refreshing juice drink that contains 100% vitamin C that you can enjoy any time of the day. It has a refreshingly awesome range of Caribbean flavors: Morby, orange, fruit punch, pineapple, coral, and pineapple coconut. Suitable for any occasion. Caribbean Cool.
And we're back with our special edition of BT Pulse. The first thing that we want to get to are some interesting comments that emerged as we woke up this morning from former government Senator Lucille Moore, who is now working with the Democratic Labour Party, we understand, as a strategist. She expressed some concern about the current direction of the Mayor Motley administration and about the current government. And I just want to read a direct quote for you before we get into it. She says, "I have known Mayor Motley for well over 50 years, and I considered her to not just be a friend. I thought of Mayor more like my sister." And then she explained that over time, she says, she became afraid because of all that was happening. Everybody deals with power differently, she says. And as hard as this is to say, I am still somewhat afraid of her. As I watch what is transpiring in Barbados, it gives me that cause for concern. In my opinion, relatively vague comments. She has not quite gotten into examples or, given much detail as to why she has said what she has said about our leader, but still very telling comments. And we've heard similar comments from commentators and persons within the political fray in the past. Is this, from your perspective, a matter of sour grapes, or is it a situation where we say that 100 Frenchmen can't be wrong. Dr. Hinds?
I really cannot speak for Miss Mo. I think she said what she wanted to say, perhaps what she felt that she needed to say. It does play very well into the kind of discourse or narrative coming from Democratic Labour Party platforms. I noted that when they had their manifesto launch, this is the DLP, they actually played that video clip from Owen Arthur where he talked about Mia Mottley being a despot. So it does play very well into that. The timing of it is quite convenient, but I would not like to speculate at all about Miss Mo's motives, if she's genuine or otherwise. And I think that's about all I can say on that.
Okay. What about you, Peter? You have been involved in politics for many, many years here in Barbados. Perhaps you might have more of a bird's eye view of some of the things that we see, especially at around election time. What do you take of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, and I could tell you that, I've known a couple of prime ministers, certainly not as well as she knows me, but I've known a couple of prime ministers personally, and I've seen them out of office and then in office, and you've been able to see the evolution and the change in personality. Gaston Brown, Kenny Anthony, Alan Chastanet, and quite a few others that I've had the opportunity to observe before and after, and I don't really know that there is this evolution in Mia Mottley's personality that Lucille is talking about. Look, there are two sides of this thing. One of them is Lucille Moore, the strategist, understands the damage that can be done on the Sunday before elections, and in our business, we understand that this is the day that you make statements. This is the day that the Democratic Labour Party won the 2013 election campaign because of unforced errors that were made by the same Owen Arthur when he was talking about Mia Mottley and other similar comments up in St. Joseph. And, over the years, the Sunday before the election is the day in which, things are won. I believe this is the day in 1971 when Tom Adams made that speech in Independence Square or wherever it was, and he said that, vote for strong opposition. So this is the day that you can have the greatest impact. And I think Lucille Moore understands that because she is a strategist of some regard, and she realizes that in terms of communication, she can do that. Lucille Moore also understands that, having been a personal friend of Mia Mottley from QC days, that she is in a very, very strong position to speak to what she sees as an evolution in the personality. And we can sit from here and say that, it seems a bit convenient, but in the final analysis, we can't say that what she's saying is not true because we don't have her bird's eye perspective. So she's playing to that narrative. The other thing which I think is clear is that she is essentially writing a script for the Democratic Labour Party. And if you look at The Nation on page 11A, you will see a statement, vote for democracy, vote for the DLP, essentially comparing the two. And it feeds largely into the script which Lucille Moore has weaved and presented on the front page of the paper, in which she says, look, democracy is in peril. And then when you hear the DLP spokesman, there's this constant hammering about democracy and the fact that, the Prime Minister is a despot. They're using Owen Arthur's comments over and over again. It's a man they had no use for. But they're going to use that to say, and to weave this idea that the Prime Minister is dictatorial. And as I said, she feeds perfectly into that narrative. And they're exploiting it for all it's worth. Do I think it is unexpected or unreasonable or unfair? That's politics. In the nature of politics, this is what it is. She has an advantage that she wants to use, and she's using it. The other question is whether or not people buy it. And this is where my challenges come. Prime Minister Mottley has been a minister of government from the time she was 27 or 28 years old. She's been in politics for a long time. She was in the Ministry of Education at 30. She was one of the youngest ministers of education next to Erskine Sandiford in Barbados. She's somebody that we know well. We know her ins and outs. We know all aspects of her life, and she is, for many intents and purposes, an open book. So my question is, what can Lucille Moore possibly tell us about Prime Minister Mia Mottley that we don't already know? And the reality is that she has been Prime Minister for 3.5 years, not in private, but in public. The overwhelming support that she has won is still, unchallenged in many ways. And I think that that's really what the public is at. So the question, I think, for the public today is, Because Lucille Moore believes that Prime Minister Motley is a threat to democracy, and because Lucille Moore is afraid of it, should we go and vote for vote of the Pisa? The Democratic Labour Party, in my opinion, has failed to give us concrete, viable reasons why we should vote for them. And I realize that this election, and I have to admit that I said it a long time ago, that I fully expect that they're going to come. Well, the Democratic Labour Party will have to weave this argument and narrative that you should vote for strong opposition or vote against the government because you don't want all 30 seats. Now, that is convenient, and I think it will work in many circles. However, the extent to which a political party that is as distinguished as the Democratic Labour Party has come to the stage where their full-page ad in the newspaper is telling people not to vote for them because they have a better team, but to vote for democracy because you really need to vote against the Barbados Labour Party and quote-unquote despotic leadership. It is something that I have some challenges understanding whether the public of Barbados will buy it, quite frankly. But you know what Lucille Moore did today, you know, in political circles, they say she played her hand and she played it magnificently. As to whether or not it's going to move the needle, I doubt it, because I have genuinely said that I don't believe that the Lucille Moores and the Lynette Holders of this world, because they're not candidates and because they're not really part of the national political conversation, can really move the needle significantly. But nonetheless, it's good political theatrics.
Understand. What about you, Devaron? You are considerably younger, but you have had your fair share of experience in the political realm. What do you take of Ms. Moore's comments based on what you've seen, based on what you understand of our political climate in Barbados? Do her comments have some merit as far as you're concerned, or should she perhaps bring a bit more substance to these kind of vague accusations that she's making?
Well, what I would say is that she won't be the first strategist to move from one political party to the next. Regarding the comments that she made regarding the Prime Minister, I can't speak to those, but what I can say is that it really ties into a narrative that has been ongoing for some time, quite frankly, from the very beginning of the administration. So she's just one of the, I would say now, many defectors or defectors from the Barbados Labour Party or disgruntled persons within the Barbados Labour Party, and that has really added to the narrative that there is something happening on that end. Given the popularity of the party, given the having all 30 seats at one point, given the national popularity of Mia Motley, why is it that you're having individuals, a friend of hers for 50 years really, who is defecting to the Democrat Labour Party? So I think it really ties into a narrative, and Peter pointed towards the fact that the Democratic Labour Party is arguing or heading in the direction where they're speaking about a despotic leader and vote for an opposition. But I think that actually makes quite a bit of sense, given the fact that the political context is one where the Democratic Labour Party has lost what will be considered traditional seats. St. Lucy's, the St. Philip's, the St. John's, and some other ones that they've carried several times and were very comfortable with. So if you can create a narrative where you're saying that, okay, well, we need to get our people, you need to get your party back. You need to have the Democratic Labour Party represented again, and that message resonates, that saying the St. Philip's and the St. John's and St. Lucy's of Barbados, I think it quite frankly would be a very useful strategy.
Understand. All right, so I just want to shift gears a little. We're speaking about the news that emerges on the Sunday before an election, and there has been another interesting development where we had Chris Sinclair, who would have served as the finance minister under the Frundle Stewart administration, giving his take, his analysis of our political climate as well. And I'll read for you what he says. He says of the two leaders, the president of the Democratic Labour Party and the Prime Minister, Mia Motley, he says that they're two different styles, two different approaches, two different levels of experience. One is clearly more known and tried than the other because Verla has never held political office in terms of a ministry. So there is a little unknown quantity. Then you have Prime Minister Motley, who has 30 years experience in public life, has been in Parliament for a considerable period, has held various ministerial portfolios, and had 3.5 years as the ultimate office holder politically, which is Prime Minister, he says. So what I want to discuss with you now, and we've kind of seen it borne out in the campaigns as well, where the Prime Minister, as leader of the party, obviously is out front and center, and that is borne out in her image being placed alongside almost every poster as far as the BLP candidates are concerned. And she is, out front and center. On the other hand, there is the Democratic Labour Party, where it is believed that their success, pundits are saying, will depend heavily on what they are able to achieve at the constituency level, the appeal of their candidates to the constituents that they're trying to represent. What say you, Peter? Does this type of an approach, on one hand, where the political leader is out front and center, does this augur well, or does the DLP's approach, where there appears to be a stronger focus on the constituency level, a better option, given everything that's happening in Barbados at this time, and given where we're at as a country?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that I do when I'm working a campaign is we try to establish, in terms of establishing the background research, one of the major assets of both political organizations. It is unquestionably so that the most significant asset of the Barbados Labour Party right now is Prime Minister Mia Mottley. Indeed, I would think that going across the Caribbean, there are several political parties that would be glad to have her as leader. And I think that it makes complete sense for the Barbados Labour Party to position this as a presidential election, with leadership being central, especially in light of COVID, and the need to carry it forward as a leadership election. I'm saying to people, choose one leader versus the other. We had 8 elections or something like that within the Caribbean in this time, and pretty much all of them were presented in that way. Even if, like in St. Lucia, for example, the leadership thing didn't work out. But certainly the idea of tried and tested leadership is the reason why Ralph Gonsalves is still Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines today in the middle of COVID. I suspect if there was no COVID, he wouldn't be there now. So it makes perfect sense, because Mia Mottley is their most significant asset, so they have to use it. So the logic of the Barbados Labour Party pressing that is not unreasonable. What Chris Sinclair said today, everyone that read it could immediately say, yeah, it's true. Clearly, the Prime Minister Mottley stands head and shoulders above Berta de Pisa in terms of leadership. So if you are presenting a narrative that says that people need to vote for experience and all this kind of thing, there's a no contest. That to me is significant. Now, if you look at the flip side, the Democratic Labour Party also, I would say to them, look at what your most significant assets are, and it is pretty clear that your leadership is not that. So you run a campaign that essentially asks people to vote in 30 different constituencies on various matters. And one of the things that they're encouraging people to vote for is to vote for a return of democracy, because the Barbados Labour Party has too many seats. So you basically have conversations in each constituency and say, well, maybe this can be the one that you can give us to help to right the scales. And for them, I think it also makes perfect sense. But does it diminish the role of the leader? Of course it does. But in this instance, I really don't know that you have a choice, because frankly, if you carry the leadership election, it would be one where there would be a no contest. And the manifesto issue, and I guess we're going to get into it, running a manifesto with your leadership being central, especially as your leadership has already criticized the fact that leadership is central to the manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party, it makes no sense. Because what you're doing is reminding people of something, which is something you shouldn't remind them of. And case in point would be the 2018 election, where the Democratic Labour Party needed to essentially run an election campaign in which Frandel Stewart was almost someone that people didn't remember. I think in 2013, to a large extent, they succeeded with the assistance of Arthur, because Arthur behaved in a way in the 11th hour that helped to convince people, what, we should vote against Arthur. So then they wake up election morning, and Frandel Stewart is the day after election. Frandel Stewart is Prime Minister. Everybody's like, whoa, how did this happen? And that's really the strategy. Now, to me, it's a similar strategy that you need to adopt this time. So just tell people, go to the polls, vote for democracy. Don't think about leadership. Just vote against Mia Mottley. And then when you wake up with Berta de Pisa the next day, then you can probably start to say, well, how did this happen? But ultimately, that's the kind of conversation that takes place. So what Chris said today is entirely consistent. I mean, Chris has a brilliant political mind. He's a former colleague of mine, and I understand how his mind works. And I think that he's basically saying what everyone else knows to be the case, that this is really a comparison of leadership in people's minds. Now, the question is, will the BLP succeed in convincing us that leadership is important, or will the DLP succeed in convincing us that democracy is under threat with Prime Minister Motley? I think that really is the balance that we are looking at here today.
Okay. Well, I see Dr. Hinds smiling. Do you
We're all smiling.
do you think that Peter's being fair in his analysis?
I think he is quite fair. I think both things are true. We are in an election in which leadership does matter. And we're in a period where leadership is critical. Getting out of this pandemic, dealing with the financial situation in Barbados, these are critical issues. And people have to ask themselves, and probably are, which leader is going to best handle this situation? But it is also true that people are concerned about democracy. People want an opposition. It is also true that because so many people in the BLP government were in the cabinet, there is a concern that constituencies may have been a bit neglected, especially during the pandemic when it was all hands on deck, to use the words of the Prime Minister. So I think both of these things are true, and each side is trying to play to its strengths. I think the DLP is trying to see if they can pick off constituencies one by one, and the BLP is trying to encourage us to vote as if the country is one single constituency. So on the one hand, the DLP is saying, pick off these constituencies. The BLP is saying one constituency, one issue leadership. And Christopher Sinclair has done a very good job of letting us know what the situation is. If it is that we are dealing with leadership, we know that one side is much stronger than the other. And people really do have to sit down and think when they are choosing how to vote, if they are going to be comfortable with potentially electing a government, even if by accident, in which the leader, the person who presents themselves as the leader today, has absolutely no experience. He also did very well to highlight the fact that the leadership issue is not settled in the DLP. And I think that Verla de Pisa has been a quite good leader for the time. She was a good leader in consolidating that party. That's really important. I see what they've done to the George Street Auditorium. I think it's good. You can't be telling people that you can run a country and you can't even maintain an auditorium and see how you could generate a low revenue. But does that translate into national leadership? I'm not sure that it does. And I don't know if people are convinced that it does either. And if we look at the candidates, outside of looking at them one by one, people have to ask themselves, are we comfortable and confident that out of this group that the DLP presents, we can have a cabinet, that can take the country forward? So these are things, I think, if we are really serious about what's happening in this election, that we have to go back and ask ourselves, what is it that we are looking for? And Christopher Sinclair was very forthright, in my opinion, with saying what the situation is with the Democratic Labour Party. I don't know that I would have said it if I were still a DLP member, and one can ask questions about why he did, but that is another question altogether.
Okay, well, that being said, I want to stick a pin here because both you and Peter have said very similar things, and it then begs the question: should the Democratic Labour Party then, once this election was called, have chosen some person with as close to equal experience as the Prime Minister to be presented as a political leader for the country?
Who is that person?
Exactly. How would you do it?
There is no alternative, quite frankly. Even in the Barbados Labour Party itself, there's no alternative to Mia Motley. But I don't think we needed Chris Sinclair to tell us the election campaign was about leadership. I live in St. Thomas, for instance, and I'm seeing posters of Mia Motley behind Cynthia Ford. And quite frankly, the Barbados Labour Party has never had any issues in carrying St. Thomas. So it's quite interesting how they're using the Motley effect, even where it's not even needed. So, but that is not new. The Barbados Labour Party has always, as Peter said, carried that presidential approach to elections. But the Democratic Labour Party has always looked at it as a constituency approach because they've not had that maximum leader for some time, but yet they've won elections. For instance, you've had constituencies that voted for an opposition in 2003, for instance, in 1999, and you've had the Democratic Labour Party just scraping enough seats to form a government in 2013. So we know that there's a culture within the Democratic Labour Party that's willing to vote for an opposition, that's willing to vote for an opposition in the context of a leader who might have that maximum appeal, like an Arthur in 2003 and in 1999. So we know the possibility is certainly there in the absence of having that alternative leader that can rival the leader of the Barbados Labour Party. So it's that kind of strategy that I think the Democratic Labour Party is employing, and I don't think they have much of a choice regarding that issue.
Okay. Thank you, Devaron. Okay, we'll take a break now, and when we return, we'll take a look at some of our so-called constituencies to watch. Stay with us.
Never too early, never too late to recharge and hydrate. Get your daily dose the right way. Grab an oasis, now why wait? Never too early, never too late to recharge and hydrate. Get your daily dose the right way. Grab an oasis, now why wait? The greatest, the safest oasis for sure. Oasis, it's purer than pure.
Caribbean Cool is a refreshing juice drink that contains 100% vitamin C that you can enjoy any time of the day. It has a refreshingly awesome range of Caribbean flavors: Morby, orange, fruit punch, pineapple, sorrel, and pineapple coconut. Suitable for any occasion. Caribbean Cool.
Okay, welcome back to our special edition of BT's Pulse, the election edition. So just continuing on from where we left off, the seat to watch. Now, even before this election would have been called, I would have been speaking with numerous political scientists and political analysts who all seem, much like the panel that we have today, to think that the Barbados Labour Party presents a much stronger voice in terms of leadership. So, and we've come up with a number of seats based on those comments that we have termed seats to watch. And one of them is St. Lucie, where, St. Philip West, with Senator Kay McConney, Dr. David Eswick, Lynette Eastman, and Karina Goodridge. St. Philip North with Michael Lashley, Nigel Newton, Omar Smith, and Wayne Beckles. Dr. Sonia Brown. And St. John with Charles Griffith, Andre Worrell, Philippe Amy. And St. Lucie with Peter Phillips, the president of the Democratic Labour Party, Verla de Pisa, and Wayne Griffith. And then there's St. Michael Northwest with Neil Rowe and Ryan Walters. And then St. Michael South Central is the final one with Marsha Cattle, Richard Seeley, and David Gill. What seats would you consider to be your seats to watch, and why? Devaron?
Well, I would certainly look at the St. Philip West seat with Dr. Eswick and Kay McConney. You have a former MP who carried the seat since 2003 and sits in quite handedly, and obviously was voted out of office because of the motley effect. And that is against a candidate who was, in essence, nominated quite recently in the constituency, yes, of the constituency, but I am not sure that there's been sufficient time for that individual to really conquer what would have been almost 20 years of representation from Dr. Eswick. So it is a seat to watch, certainly. And the other ones that you've made mention of, I also think those are seats to watch. But what I would also make mention of is St. Michael South East with Santia Bradshaw, which I found quite interesting because she's been having what I would say is a very minimal role in the campaign. And this is an individual who is the head of government business in the parliament. And some have said, the next Prime Minister of Barbados in many forms of fashion, and she's been acting Prime Minister, for instance, but yet she's had quite a bit of a minimal role in the campaign, and is a seat, quite frankly, that could also be won easily by the Democratic Labour Party, considering she only won the seat by 10 votes in 2013. So it's definitely a seat that I would add to your list to watch, but the other ones are certainly ones that I would agree with as well.
Okay. What about you, Dr. Hinds? What do you consider to be your seats to watch come Wednesday?
I would add St. Philip South to your list, just because I am keen to see whether some of the revelations that are coming from Anthony Wood in St. Philip in general will mean anything to St. Philip. I think St. Philip has a tendency to lean in the direction of the Democratic Labour Party. So I think it is possible that they could take those 3 seats. Possible. I would say of these ones that you have in St. Michael, I think in terms of the numbers from the last election, the St. Philip Northwest would have been the closest one. So on the basis of numbers only, I would think that would be the easiest one to return. So that is with Neil Rowe and Ryan Walters. And I'm not as certain about St. Lucie, to be honest with you. I think St. Lucie has been showing a shift away from the DLP over the last 3 elections. And I'm wondering the extent to which Verla de Pisa can reverse that.
What about you, Peter? Are the other 2 panelists being a bit generous in your opinion? Devaron has added the race between Santia Bradshaw and Pedro Shepherd.
Yeah, no, I think Devaron is being very generous. Because I've heard his comments in this regard before, and I think that there's an abundance of generosity on his side in this issue. I think that, and I appreciate the Kristina's remarks and the extent to which we have to use the science and we have to look at the actual data. And the data tells us a compelling story. Frankly, I am not sure how St. Michael Southeast gets into the conversation, because the person that approaches the, Sandra Bradshaw there has to turn back 2,500 votes. You need a swing that is enormous in terms of getting that seat back. And I can't see that happening in this election. Historically, and I've been,
Pedro Shepherd, who is an educator for many, many years in the constituency, has what it takes to unseat her?
The point I'm making is that when it comes down to it, we have to look at what has happened in terms of constituency swings, what has happened in terms of national swings, and the likelihood that that is possible. And I'm saying in the case of St. Michael Southeast, the likelihood that anyone, Pedro Shepherd or anyone else, can turn back 2,500 votes seems low in an election like this, because this is not going to be an election in which you have swings of that proportion. And as I said, if I look at the science, and I've studied it in terms of the last few elections and so on, and the big swing years and the small swing years, and generally speaking, constituency swings are in single digits unless it's a constituency that the party is not likely to win. So you have double-digit swings in places that you're not going to win the constituency. But in terms of winnable constituencies, invariably it's single-digit constituencies. Around 68% is where historically we have more or less identified a safe seat, a seat that's not likely to change. And there are really not a whole lot of seats in Barbados that are below that threshold. And it's on that basis that I have made the assertion some time ago that really there are 3 seats in play, which is St. John's, St. Philip North, St. Michael Northwest. The comments that Kristina made about St. Lucie are entirely accurate. If you look at Dennis Lowe's 15-year tenure, there's been diminishing returns on the part of St. Lucie for a long time. I cannot, for the life of me, understand why Verla de Pisa would want to go up there to deal with that reality, because it has become a typical seat like St. Michael West, where you're able to track diminishing returns over a point in time and then it flips. Now, in a situation where a seat flips naturally, not like St. John, it flips naturally, the likelihood that you're going to get it back quickly is low. So my thing is, why do you impose yourself on a battle like that where the outcome doesn't seem likely? The other thing is that St. Lucie, remember in 1981, when the whole country was moving in the direction of the Democratic Labour Party after the first term of the Barbados Labour Party, St. Lucie went in the completely opposite direction and voted out their former member of parliament who served with some distinction. So I'm just saying that the St. Lucie peculiarity is one that I've watched and I've studied. I did a detailed analysis of it even 2-3 years ago. And I've come to the conclusion that it is not fertile ground. We've been talking about St. Michael South Central, largely because there's a former minister there. We've been talking about St. Philip West because there's a former minister there. The hill there is probably less high than the one in St. Michael Southeast, but ultimately it's still a fairly high hill that they have to climb. Now, it is entirely possible that in as much as Barbadians might want to compensate with giving back seats, then they may want to introduce these people, and these individuals may very well have what it takes to give us an unusually high swing to be able to get those seats across the line for the Democratic Labour Party. My question is it that people are really going to want to vote for these people? Because my argument has always been the Democratic Labour Party needs to turn over a new page. Can you successfully turn over a new page if you elect to office two persons from the previous administration, one who was presumptive deputy prime minister, and the other one who was a bit of a troublemaker? And this is where my challenge lies in relation to them. Frankly, if the Democratic Labour Party emerges in the next election with few seats, and among them you have some of these old-timers, the DLP is looking for trouble down the road. And quite frankly, my hope for the DLP is that if indeed it does succeed in landing seats, it lands some of the newer people, like the Ryan Walters that has worked really, really hard in that constituency. And I agree with Devaron entirely that it is a winnable constituency. So yeah, certainly if they can land people like
I think
Ryan
that was
Walters,
me, but anyway.
Right, it was Kristina, my apologies, right. Yeah, no, if you can land constituencies like that, I would think it would be better for the Democratic Labour Party in terms of rebuilding. But from what I am hearing, Ryan is struggling in this constituency, largely because when you impose Prime Minister Motley on almost any constituency in Barbados for long enough, you're going to have challenges. Because once people are thinking in the mind of who they're voting for, it creates that reality. So that's how I'm seeing it. I am seeing that there are 3 seats that I have historically been looking at. I accept that the other few are entirely possible. But the idea of saying that, there is this thing, I'm thoroughly convinced that St. Lucie was a bad decision for Verda de Pisa, and I honestly don't think that she's going to win. Which basically means that you may have a situation where the DLP goes back into Parliament with somebody else leading it, and as I said, it's not going to be nice.
Yeah. Peter, you're getting
I really agree there too, because I think that when I heard that announcement, I believe Peter and the two of us were on the same show when that was announced. And I was quite startled because I thought that the obvious choice would have been St. John.
There you go. Yeah.
Because the fortunes of St. Lucie have not been good. I'm really curious to see what will happen though in St. Michael South Central. I see that is one that you all have up. And I am not certain the extent to which personality is going to help the DLP or harm the BLP, because I do gather that this particular race is one about personality. The one who is more viewed as more personable, as opposed to someone who may be viewed as a little bit less so. So I think that is an interesting one that I am not willing to call one way or another. That's a flip a coin one for me.
Certainly a constituency to watch, but I wanted to just stick a pin as Peter was making his points. We love the historical scientific analysis that you've given us, but certainly you are a pollster by profession. And are any of your points as it relates to these constituencies based on any newer polls that have been conducted?
But Devaron has been polling too, so maybe you should ask Devaron that question. I'm not at liberty.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to him as yet. We're going to start with the senior pollster, and then we'll get to the junior.
No, I can discuss poll data. And as a matter of whether the comments are influenced by data, then maybe you can pick and choose in terms of what I say, what you think is influenced. But the reality of this business is that I'm under obligation not to discuss data, which is property of a client, and until such time I'm given leave to do so, I won't.
I think Peter's being a bit cheeky on my end, but what I would say, Peter, is that the idea that a candidate will have to overcome, let's say, 2,500 votes in this election, I don't think it's going to be the case, because we're going to have a significantly lower turnout an election, and it's going to be a far more competitive election than it was in 2018. So that's the reason why I said, for instance, seats the St. Michael Southeast may very well be in play, given what I've been hearing on the ground with Sandra Bradshaw, for instance, and the fact that she's had such a minimal role and rumors about her moving from the constituency and those various things. So the idea that we're going to have a situation where you need a 30-point swing and overcoming 2,500 votes and those various things, had the circumstance not been one where electoral turnout would be decreased because of COVID and almost 7,000 persons not being able to vote, I would agree. But I think the circumstances and the context now are fundamentally different. You're probably going to have a far more competitive election because of those circumstances than otherwise.
Well, thank you for that, Devaron.
Just quickly though, on Friday I did a program with Bernie DePisa in another place, and she alluded to the fact that they had poll data that was convincing them that they were doing well in particular areas. And you know, I don't know whether Devaron knows anything about it, but I'm anxious to have her reveal this poll data and to speak to it, because she mentioned it, as I said, on public television, and said that they're in receipt of information that tells them that they are winning, you know, comfortably in some of these areas. As I said, I don't know anything about it, but I just wonder whether this might be a useful forum to see if we can find out what these DLP polls are saying, because as I said, I'm at a bit of a loss.
All right. So one of the questions that I did have for you, though, because we have placed St. Lucie as one of our seats to watch. At least two of you have said that you're not so sure. What does that where does that take the discussion of political leadership? I want to pose this to Devaron and Kristina, especially because Peter has already touched on it. But one would have expected that she is setting herself up, if not to become the prime minister, certainly to become the leader of the opposition. Does it leave the Democratic Labour Party if we have a situation where St. Lucie's lost to the Bees?
Well, first I would say that the fortunes of the Peace in St. Lucie might be a bit more rosier than what has been predicted. She does have some strengths up there. She's been working up there for the last 2 years. And again, the argument the party has been making is return the dem seats home, so to speak. But regarding your question specifically, no, the Democratic Labour Party's constitution speaks to a political leader and it speaks to a president. Verda Pisa is the president of the party. She is the assumed political leader as well, too, because they don't have any parliamentary seats. But the real game begins in parliament, and there's no guarantee that any political leader or whoever wins an election is guaranteed to be opposition leader. So I don't think that has ever been the case. We assume that's the case, but quite frankly, the game is on for whoever actually remains or gain their seats.
For me, I really want to say that everything is in play here, because the 2018 election was quite peculiar. So although we are talking about reversing 2,000 votes in some instances, I don't think that is the full picture. So I think that there are a lot of things that are in play, and we may be throwing some curveballs. One of those may well be St. Lucie. But if Mr. Pisa is not able to win in St. Lucie, someone else who wins one of the seats, assuming that the DLP will win a few seats, will need to be selected as the leader of the opposition. And they will have to decide that among themselves. They're going to have to work that out one way or another. And I would also go as far as to say that even if Mr. Pisa wins St. Lucie, we cannot be certain, depending on who the other people are, if she will end up as the leader of the opposition. And this is exactly what Chris Sinclair was alluding to today in the paper, and is again one of the things that I really wonder why he was saying, especially as a member of the DLP. I don't think that is the kind of thing that you want to say about your party so close to election day.
Even if it's true?
Even if it's true, I feel you hold that to your chest, and that's a discussion you have with your friends. Maybe after the election, you can say whatever it is you need to say. But if you are faithful to the party and you want them to do as well as possible, I don't see why you would say that so close to the election. So it raises some questions for me about the motives of Chris Sinclair. Why would you hold an interview like this Sunday before the election?
Why will Lucy more?
Well, we know that she is a strategist, right? But my question is, what do we know about the other person? As far as I'm aware, and according to what I read, He doesn't claim to be involved in this election one way or another. So I would really be concerned as a member of the DLP about my comrade. What is my comrade doing in the paper?
I want to just say very quickly, I think the DLP has reached a point where it needs to throw out these conventional assumptions about party loyalty and, basically saying the best thing it can do is to support the DLP fervently. I think the DLP needs to have a level of introspection. And it needs to ask itself whether it has made wise choices and prudent choices in the past regarding leadership. It has to ask itself whether it needs to essentially be wallowing in the past glory of a prime minister that think that you had glorious years for 10 years. And I think it needs to move on. And I think what Chris is being he's being honest and frank and saying, look, we have to step up to the plate and we need to provide good leadership.
Introspection happens inside, not outside. So the discussions you need to be inside and certainly not right before the election. I really think this is something that is unwise to do if you remain a member of the party, unless you are not just being honest. And again, I don't want to impute motive, but I am very curious as to why you would say that you remain a member of the party, that you are not involved in any kind of political campaigning, and you would have this interview right before. As you said, it is true, but everything that is true, you don't have to say everything that's true.
No, Kristina was saying that I can't remember, is in 1998, somewhere around then, when Kenny Anthony was plucked from the CARICOM Secretariat as General Counsel and parachuted into the leadership of the St. Lucia Labour Party, and he revolutionized St. Lucia politics. He won a seat from not even being in Parliament. One day, he was in CARICOM as a public servant, a Caribbean public servant, and the next day he was Prime Minister of St. Lucia. Because the St. Lucia Labour Party realized that they had a challenge, they had no leadership material, and they had an individual who was affiliated with them, resting somewhere, and they said, let us bring him, put him into the most winnable seat, which is in Beaufort, and ultimately the rest is history, and he did well for them. This is the kind of conversation the Democratic Labour Party needs to have with itself now, and I think that we all appreciate that after Wednesday, Verla will not be the leader of the Democratic Labour Party. So even if she wins the seat, she goes in with other people, she's not going to emerge as leader. But ultimately, that's fine, because my thing is that I think Verla went in at a good time. I think she fought a good fight. I think she did the best for the organization. However, the reality is when that organization is looking to move into office, it needs to look far and wide to be someone else. It may even be very well the same Chris Sinclair that they go back for and drag him back in. And I'm saying what Chris is doing at this stage is basically saying, look, this is where we are, and we can either delude ourselves that all is well and there were glorious years, or alternatively we can be frank and open. And my thing is that if it is that Chris Sinclair can now be known for a level of honesty, which many have been concerned has eluded him in the past, it's great. And I think that is the first step. So maybe he sees himself as the next leader of the Democratic Labour Party, and he's saying, let me address past perceptions of my.
I was very surprised that I was very surprised that was not raised earlier when Chris spoke about motives, and it tell me of this motive. I thought that was natural thinking that this may be someone looking to set themselves up for the future and stepping over the dead body, so to speak. I thought that was the motive at the time, to be honest. But he's a relatively young man, clearly a political animal, and he may very well want some political
red meat.
Well, some may argue perhaps that he could have waited until the 23rd to release these comments. But that being said, we'll let Devaron have the last word on this. We have to take a break, and when we get back, we'll wrap up our seats to watch. We'll take a look at some of our third parties, and then we'll also take a look at the manifesto promises. So stay with us.
Never too early, never too late to recharge and hydrate. Get your daily dose the right way. Grab an oasis, now why wait? Never too early, never too late to recharge and hydrate. Get your daily dose the right way. Grab an oasis, now why wait? The greatest, the safest oasis for sure. Oasis, it's purer than pure.
Caribbean Cool is a refreshing juice drink that contains 100% vitamin C that you can enjoy any time of the day. It has a refreshingly awesome range of Caribbean flavors: Morbi, orange, fruit punch, pineapple, coral, and pineapple coconut. Suitable for any occasion. Caribbean Cool.
And we're back with our special edition of BT Pulse ahead of the January 2022 election. Now, one of the things that we have not touched on to any great extent would be some of our third and fourth parties. So I wanted to find out from you whether there are any of the third and fourth parties that you consider to have a chance in this election. Any of the candidates? I know there is Bishop Joseph Atherley in St. Michael Central.
True, that's correct.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? Anything in it for the third parties? We hear over and over that really is an exercise in futility, but perhaps this time might be a bit different.
Can I just say no? I really don't think there's much future going forward for the third parties, particularly given the individuals that they have and just the realities of Caribbean politics. But what I would say is that they may very well be a spoiler emerging in St. Michael's Central, because between 2003, I think Peter could speak to this, 2003 and 2013, I believe it was, there was about 12,500 votes between those years, and the number of votes that separated the parties was about 300 over 3 elections. So we know that's a seat that's always very close. And Bishop Atherley obviously is from that constituency as it relates to his priesthood and his bishophood rather. And he may very well be able to, let's say, pull over maybe 100 votes, 120 votes. That may very well create a spoiler in St. Michael's Central. The contrast in St. Michael's Central, for instance, between a young Corey Cox and a more aged Arthur Holden, that's a good contrast. And again, it's a constituency that, quite frankly, is always very close. So I would say the third parties may very well have a spoiler or play a spoiler role in that constituency. Regarding the other constituencies, I really don't think there's much future for them, to be honest.
Well, what say the other two panelists? We're running out of time, but you're not allowed to say no full stop. So what say you?
I can go first. I don't have a lot of interest in the third parties. I think that third parties, generally speaking, they're wasting people's time, and I don't think that we should waste our time discussing the likelihood of people who are not going to be part of the conversation. They're a distraction. I don't share Devaron's view. You know, the Corey Cox has a 2,000 vote margin to close, and I don't know that Bishop Atherley is really bringing anything to help him, because Bishop Atherley is probably going to get, if he gets 100 votes, he's lucky. And if he does that, he still has a big margin to close. Atherley believes that he can damage Holder, and that's the reason why he's going there. It's a level of political vindictiveness that I think is not befitting for a man of the cloth. But I think that Bishop Atherley has made some questionable moral decisions already in terms of his political future, so it certainly doesn't surprise me. But as far as third parties are concerned, we can spend the time discussing, serious politics.
What about you, Kristina? Certainly the man of God stands a chance in a constituency where he has served as, a pastor, a religious leader, and where he is said to have contributed significantly to the community.
Certainly not. I really think that for any of these parties to have a future, they have to become mass-based parties. So I am willing to give them a chance, just not in this election. They have to put in the work, establish themselves across the 30 constituencies in Barbados to begin to have a chance, to even begin to have a chance. In this election, I don't think they're going to make too much of a difference to anyone.
Moving along smartly then, the campaign promises, the manifestos that were released last week. On the BLP side, we have a number of promises, including the construction of 10,000 houses in 5 years, removal of land tax on the first 400,000 in terms of property, a 3,000 grant to first-time homeowners, and a number of other promises. On the DLP side, we hear about a 50% reduction in the garbage and sewage levy, compensation for the workers who lost thousands during the 2018 debt restructuring, an education overhaul, which is something on both sides, but the DLP is saying that they'll include a 1,500 grant per year for households or students enrolled in programs between 16 and 30, and a number of other campaign promises that we come to expect when election time rolls around. But we also took a look at some of the persons who will be participating in the election to hear their views in terms of what they expect from the next government.
Ain't no money to get nothing happening. He give me a lip $50 parking. Ain't no money to get nothing happening. He give me a lip $50, $70. Tell me gonna get some seeds and trays. Everybody buy them and got them there soaking to get them hatch up. So we just see like the better man because most of the time he was around you helping people. You know what I mean? He was helping people, Marshall, and doing nothing at all.
Mr.
Marshall.
CD to me is a very good candidate to me because he comes around, he looks, he asks, he helps everybody to me. Don't care what you just say, Mr. CD, all through the
No,
years.
we don't see Marshall in this constituency. The only politician that we see in this constituency is Kurt Humphrey. So I would tell anybody, Kurt Humphrey got my back to the end. And in order to give my support to him, I would vote back for the BLP again. I haven't seen nobody from the DLP since last election. So I don't expect that they can come back now and just jump in the race again and expect that everything going to be dandy.
I'm glad to see Sealy back out. Because for the last 15 years, Sealy bring a lot of positiveness to the constituency. As far as getting things happen, sports-wise, culture-wise, you know, a lot of different things.
Yeah. So as you can tell, many of the voters very concerned with, seeing some person, making sure that they're checking for them. And as you can tell, all of those were taken from the constituency of St. Michael South Central, where I did a feature a few days ago. But given the campaign promises that you've heard, what we tend to hear from many of the Barbadian voters, would you say that the campaign has delivered the discourse that is needed at this juncture? What issues have stood out in your mind, and what issues should be standing out as far as you're concerned? Dr. Hinds?
I really don't think that the campaign has delivered a whole lot. And I think that is a problem for several people who are either undecided or who have decided that they are not voting. I am a bit disheartened by the direction in which the campaigns have gone. And on the one hand, we're talking about the Barbados Labour Party focusing very heavily on leadership. That is all well and good. But I do think the BLP still needs to acknowledge that there are some people out there who are not very happy with certain things inside of that political party and in the government. One that stands out very easily is this issue of the nurses' strike and how it will be resolved, these issues that the nurses have. And I also am not particularly pleased on the whole with what I am seeing and hearing from the DLP platforms, because there is not a whole lot in there that convinces me that we have a lot of viable alternatives if this party is to be elected. And further, the continued references to the glorious 10 years, romanticizing the previous administration. This is a big problem for me. You have to stop and say, we made some mistakes along the way, but this is a different DLP. We have learned from our mistakes and we are going to do X, Y, and Z. So I'm not pleased by the political discourse, the level of political discourse coming from either side. To me, this is not really about how we are going to improve Barbados. This is about how are we, B or D, going to win this election. And I think this is what a lot of people do not like about politics, do not like about politicians, and want to see changed in our political system.
Interestingly enough, if we took manifestos seriously in Barbados, Barbados would be Wakanda by now, if not Switzerland. And the reality is that these are just quite simply promises that are never fulfilled. I mean, what Kristina said could have been said 20 years in or even 30 years ago, quite frankly. The campaigns have never really spoken to issues. And one of the things that I think is a real tragedy is the COVID circumstance, because now you have what I would consider really a digital divide. The campaigns have been brought online, but that has really left out several persons in the discussion. And a lot of the issues are not being thrashed out. A lot of issues are not coming up because you brought this thing to a social media platform where we've just treat social media as something for entertainment. It is primarily something for entertainment. So it's no surprise that when you take politics online, it becomes entertainment. So we've lost quite a bit of the discussions that we've seen last election. We heard about the blue economy. We saw the Barbados Civil Party bring out its own pieces of legislation. We heard about islands off of Barbados. We heard about a whole host of things that inspired people. Right now, I'm not hearing anything that's quite inspiring from either political party, quite honestly. But I think that's the fault of, again, it being an online campaign as opposed to the traditional approach. Not saying the traditional approach is perfect, but it certainly delivered a lot more than what we're getting now.
What about you, Peter? Briefly, because we want to move on to another topic right after this one.
Kobe, there's so much I want to say in this regard, but let me start by saying that I saw that clip online before, and I also read something that Emmanuel Joseph wrote on Christchurch piece. And honestly, I think that both of them are Barbados Today hit jobs, with respect. To me, they don't tell us a lot about what constituents think and want. It just sounds like political statements that the Barbados Today is promoting. And it wasn't helpful. So for me, I can't see that as being part of any reflection of what people want. Okay? In terms of my own research, this is a single issue election. It's an election in which people are voting on COVID, which is no different to St. Lucia, which is no different to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You go right back up the chain, United States of America. People are essentially voting for the government that they believe can handle COVID well. And to me, a lot of the conversations revolve around that. Whether manifestos are relevant or not in that context, I am not sure. I don't believe the Barbados Labour Party's manifesto needed to deal with COVID responses simply because they're in government and they're dealing with it. What they have done is they have painted a picture for me of Barbados in another 10 or 15 years, and it's one which is interesting, if not perfect. The Democratic Labour Party attempted to deal with some of the COVID responses. To me, they got into some of the minutiae of things like lockdowns and whatnot that I thought was unwise within the context of a manifesto, but nonetheless, it's brave. As far as the platforms are concerned, I mean, I share Devaron's concerns with the fact that it was a short campaign, it was presented in a different way. Generally speaking, this campaign has had a lot less filth than 2018, and that's something I'm extremely happy about. I do agree that we haven't been able to escalate conversations about national development in the way that we should, but we have not been talking about there's not been no misogyny or homophobia in large, well, to some extent, there hasn't been. And that's something I think about which we can be happy. And I have noted that all of the COVID elections, all of them that have been conducted online, generally speaking, they have been cleaner and nicer. The one in St. Kitts was probably the most clean election that they have had in years, and St. Kitts has had a history of a lot of nastiness on the platform. But the reality is that in the internet environment, it's harder to be nasty because you know that basically your information is being, I mean, Dr. Lone knows of this thing that he made some unfortunate statements that are gonna haunt him for the rest of his political life because it's a game changer. You know, things that are said online are part of the record in perpetuity. And people understand that, and as a result, when we're speaking online, the conversation tends to be a lot more clean. So mercifully, that has been the case this time around.
Okay, all right. Let's move along now to the issue of voter turnout. They say a heavy voter turnout favors the opposition, but this time around, of course, we have the COVID-19 pandemic to worry about as well, and we're in a situation currently where we are moving closer to about 5,000 active cases, the possibility that persons who live with persons who are infected may also not be able to participate. And I know Dr. Hinds and Peter would have spoken to this issue, but given where we're at and the fact that the EBC has now said that their hands are totally and completely tied, full stop, where does that leave us? Can we say that the outcome of the election on Wednesday will be a true representation of the will of the people if so many votes are missing? Devaron?
Well, that is definitely one of the major concerns. You can't have a circumstance where 5,000 odd people are unable to vote. And that's pretty much the size of Bridgetown, for instance. So when you have constituencies like St. James Central, Bridgetown, St. Michael's Central, and these constituencies are literally won by 100 votes, you can definitely see how 5,000 people could have a dramatic impact on the results of the election. And we just simply don't want a situation where a government is elected by a minority amount of votes that is never healthy for democracy. I think it's something that will hover over them for the remainder of the political life, particularly given the fact that we started the narrative about despotic leaders and democracy needed and those various things. We don't want a Barbados. A Barbados elected now with less than 50% of the vote, because that just carries on that argument unnecessarily. So I think the COVID circumstance is one to watch, and I think it's a very unfortunate circumstance that could have been avoided, if you ask me.
And I'll just ask Dr. Hinds and Peter to weigh in on that issue one last time. I know you've made comments before, but the final decision seems we've reached a final decision, it seems, on this matter, and we know where our cases are now. Do we consider this the will of the people being borne out in this election, the true will of the people?
I think it is really undemocratic for us to go forward in this way. I am less concerned about what this might mean for the election outcome and more concerned about what it means for a country that says it is a democracy. I'm concerned about the fact that we have this wonderful Charter of Barbados that talks about all of the things that we are supposed to try to aspire to. And then we go ahead right after drafting this and conduct an election that is less than democratic because it disenfranchises around 5,000 people. And I also want to say that it imperils people too, because there are people out there, there are some diehards out there who are going to go and vote, even though they suspect that they may have COVID-19. And that is not good for public health. I have a lot of issues with what is happening right now with the pandemic and the election in the pandemic. And then there are also people who are not interested in voting because they are fed up with the system. They're fed up with the handling of the pandemic. They're fed up with the pandemic and with the austerity and the poor governance that went before. So I think we are in a serious place where we have to reconsider not just what politics means in terms of who wins and who loses an election, but what it means in terms of the health of Barbados as a democracy. And right now, I think Barbados needs some medicine. This election is not it.
Peter?
I support both of the other analysts entirely in this regard. I think it's unfortunate that we're having this conversation on the eve of the election and that those people can't vote. Because I'm sorry, those people are part of Barbados, they're citizens, they're eligible to vote, and they need to vote. I think it's an indictment on us as not only a democracy, as Kristina said, but a modern democracy, that we cannot find a way to accommodate those persons who are otherwise healthy, but they have unfortunately been afflicted with an infectious disease. And Kristina's comments are on point. You know, persons who might suspect that they have COVID will deliberately not get tested until after election day. And that's unfortunate. And that's the kind of conversation that we shouldn't be having. The part that I would depart from slightly is the assumption that a high or low turnout can be interpreted one way or the other politically. And, you know, I've been at pains to point out over the years that this belief that a high turnout favors a change and a low turnout favors the incumbent is not supported by data in any Caribbean country. But nonetheless, every election people say, oh, you know, we have a high turnout. We had a situation in St. Lucia last year where they had a low turnout. And nonetheless, there was a change in government. In Barbados, we had a red wash in a situation of a lower turnout than the previous year. So I think that people need to start making this assumption that it's as easy as saying high or low, one person will win or the other. I have two concerns. One concern is that supporters of the Barbados Labour Party, people who feel the BLP will be better, will not vote either because they don't feel they need to. Well, because they don't feel they need to, because they feel the BLP has already won. I'm concerned that Democratic Labour Party supporters might not go out and vote because they figure that it doesn't make any sense, because they have already lost the election, and they wonder whether it makes sense to go out and vote in that condition. Or alternatively, supporters of both parties may say, I'm not voting because I'm not prepared to expose myself to COVID in these kinds of conditions. And I think that that's unfortunate, because if enough people, and I said it before, if enough people do not participate in the election, it changes the likely outcome. We saw it in Barbados in 2013. To this day, I am convinced that the majority of Barbadians thought that the Barbados Labour Party was a better option in 2013 after we had 4.5 years of front door story. But nonetheless, the Democratic Labour Party won because you had a reduced voter turnout, and there we have it. United States of America, nobody can convince me that a majority of Americans thought that Donald Trump was a better leader than Hillary Clinton. And unfortunately, nonetheless, you had a voter turnout in certain states that essentially put Donald Trump in office, largely because a lot of people stayed at home because they figure Hillary already won, and they really are not particularly enthusiastic about either candidate. They were demotivated and they didn't vote. So it can happen. And I think the best way to ensure that we do not have unintended consequences is to go and vote based on your own personal intention. When this is done, I really do hope that as a country we sit down and we look at electoral reform in all of its dimensions, and we start to consider some of these fundamental issues that have been plaguing us for some time. The third party thing is an important point. The third party interests in some regard are legitimate, and they're saying things that I believe need to be said. The problem is that you can't say it in that political space because you'll be ignored. But we need to create spaces and opportunities for alternative expression that are not necessarily part of this political thing that is going to be drowned out in those ways. So that to me is where this conversation needs to go. I really do hope that we don't miss the opportunity again after this election to sit down and let's start having conversations, not about constitutional reform only, but about electoral reform to ensure that this nonsense does not happen again, because it is totally unacceptable.
Understood. Thank you. We are just over time, but before we end the program, you've given us a night of hot takes, and we want you to leave us with some hot takes of your own to go. Your predictions for the election in terms of who wins how many seats. You all seem to favor Barbados Labour Party victory, but will it be another 30? What does the split look like?
No one wants to go first.
All at once.
I'm gonna try, okay?
We're not going to
I'm gonna try, right? But I am going to say that unlike the other two, I have not done any polling. So I am very open to being wrong. And I'm going to give the DLP between 2 and 6 seats. Democratic Labour Party, I'll give between 2 and 6 seats. And this is on the basis of no polling, a combination of what I think are educated guesses based on the data, and also some personality features that I think could make a difference.
What about you, Devaron?
Well, I'm not sure who this second person is that did polling Dr Kristina, but what I would say is that I actually agree with her. I would cap it at about 6 seats as well, with the idea that the election turnout would be lower. And I actually think that the base of the Democratic Labour Party will likely come up more than the base of the Barbados Labour Party, because the argument that's being made to them is that we need to take some of this thing back. It's more of a get out the vote type than what the Barbados Labour Party is having. We're safe with me. That's more comforting than it is something that's invigorating. Safe with me. Okay, cool. We're safe with me. So we come out to vote. As opposed to the Democratic Labour Party, who is arguing we need to take some of this thing back from this lady. So I can see that the base of the Democratic Labour Party returning home, that quite frankly many of them supported her during the last election, given the fact she won 73% of the national vote. So I would definitely say the prospects are looking up for the Democratic Labour Party in that context. Peter is the pollster, so he will let us know if we are wrong or right.
We'll let our distinguished pollster have the last.
Well, Barbados' constitution doesn't have a Fifth Amendment, but certainly if it did, I would be allowed to remain silent. But that's the position I'm going to take in relation to prediction. I do believe that the people of Barbados at this stage, in terms of where public opinion is, people of Barbados will vote for a return to the Barbados Labour Party. I think that's what everyone wants. As to whether that will happen or the dimensions, I don't want to say too much. What I do wish we could have talked about a bit in terms of this conversation is the gender dimension, as we have 2 female leaders vying for office. And I heard a couple of things that I would love to have looked at through a gender lens. So if you're minded to have another conversation after, then maybe that can be a key talking point, because that's something that we left out. But in terms of seat choice, there's I'm not calling numbers.
Understood. I mean, you could have given us a general range, but that's all right. If we want to discuss women and politics, perhaps I could invite Dr. Hinds and yourself to join us on election night when we continue the discussion on the 2022 general election. But for now, we are all out of time. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our 3 distinguished panelists. Dr. Kristina Hinds, Dr. Kristina Hinds, Devaron Bruce, Mr. Peter Wickham, and also to the team here at Barbados Today, our editor-in-chief, Sandy Dean, our producer, Kobe Brooms. Thank you also to the viewers for joining us. This has been a special edition of BT Pulse.
Never too early, never too late to recharge and hydrate. Get your daily dose the right way. Grab an oasis, now why wait? Never too early, never too late to recharge and hydrate. Get your daily dose the right way. Grab an oasis, now why wait? The greatest, the safest oasis for sure. Oasis, it's purer than pure.
Caribbean Cool is a refreshing juice drink that contains 100% vitamin C that you can enjoy any time of the day. It has a refreshingly awesome range of Caribbean flavors: Morby, orange, fruit punch, pineapple, sorrel, and pineapple coconut. Suitable for any occasion. Caribbean Cool.